Lieutenant Tasha Yar got a snoot full. Wesley feels strange, but also good. And Data leaks when you prick him. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc, Lofton, and Denise Crosby.
Wow, that's an intro.
Those are direct
Ryan,
quotes. It's just, those are, my name is Ryan T. Husk. Today we're doing a review of Star Trek, The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 2, entitled The Naked Now, story by John D.F. Black and D.C. Fontana, teleplay by D.C. Fontana, directed by Paul Lynch. This was October 5th, 1987, or October 3rd, 1987, depending on where you look. We still haven't figured that out. How you guys doing?
Oh,
doing great.
Doing great. One of my favorite episodes. So
me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this was a lot going on in this episode.
So we specifically, myself and the fans specifically, did not say anything to you, Cirroc, about this episode and what a change in tone it is from the first one, because we didn't want to spoil anything. What were you thinking when you first saw what was going on? Or let's just start with Denise's rock hard abs, by the way. Good work.
Those are real. Kudos. No CGI. That's of course before children.
Wow.
You two ladies, let's be honest. It all happens. Children, have a way of changing things. But
you were rocking it in this episode, that's for sure. I found myself laughing a lot watching this episode. I would pause and rewind things so many times, and
me too.
I just found myself laughing and really having a good time watching this episode. I felt good, which I didn't expect, because I was expecting, this is going to be something else. But I'll say that, I had a feel for the original series. So this did, for me, feel like an extension of the original series kind of storytelling and even pace.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of comparisons for me. I really felt like I was watching the original series with a different cast in some type of way. It felt closer to the Spock Star Trek.
Well, funny you should say that, because this is kind of a continuation of an original series episode. When they mentioned James T. Kirk in the Enterprise, by the way, everybody at home, that's a non-appearance mention for James T. Kirk, maybe not the last, but this was season 1, episode 4, I believe, of the original series, called The Naked Time. So this is kind of like a reference to that. And thank goodness they didn't start doing that with like every single Star Trek series, right? Then like Deep Space Nine, episode 3 is The Naked Wahoo's It, and Voyager episode 5 is The Naked Guy, or what, The Naked Gun, I don't know.
They correct me if I'm wrong, but I think The Next Gen is the only Star Trek, right, that takes from the original and either reworks one of the episodes or has a continuum in some way. I don't think any of the other series did that.
It happens a little bit more now with the newest Star Trek series. Like they're doing little like tribble. Well, actually, Deep Space Nine did do a tribble episode. That was pretty good. But this one, like Cirroc says, at least to me, is this first season does feel more like original series Star Trek than it feels like 90s Star Trek.
Right. And of course, there's a reason for that, because a lot of the original series people were brought on board. And Gene, very much like, we touched on last week, really wanted that template in place. Star Trek he saw Star Trek in this way. Like it'd be so interesting to see what Gene would think now.
Yeah.
Watching the new shows, or even any that followed, after his death. What comments he might have about it. Would he like it? Would he agree with the direction? Because you really see in that first season of The Next Gen that it goes hand in hand with the original series.
He had a particular vision that he kind of stuck
Absolutely.
with. You wonder
Absolutely.
if he continued to make more series, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, whatever, and he was show running those, if those would all have that same kind of tone as original series
Absolutely.
or first season.
Exactly. I have a feeling it would look quite differently.
Yeah, there's a different pace that I noticed when he's at the helm of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's moments, for example, when I'm watching it and you can hear those tricorder sounds or something, like there's a quietness, and then there's this sound effect that they use when there's a stillness in the room, and it's consistent with the original series kind of quietness and then sound effect of the machinery, like the sound effects. So I noticed those kinds of pace things where it would be slow in certain parts, like a hallway walking down scene, just walking down. A lot of kind of moments like those are always in the original series and Next Generation. Now I'm seeing these kind of long shots of walking, just bridge noise, ambient sound. And it adds a eeriness kind of space station-y feel to it when I feel those kinds of moments. So this definitely made me feel like, oh, this is the original series. This is a reboot of the original series, though. This gave me the most of that kind of a feeling.
Some people actually have those sound effects as like a bedtime thing. Like I think there's like a YouTube program that says like 10 hours straight of the Next Generation bridge sounds, and it's just like that really quiet hum. If you really listen, you'll notice every time they're on the ship, depending on, no matter where they are, it's slightly different possibly, but there's like a hum of the ship. And then when they go off planet, it's not. But if you'll notice, there's always this low like kind of sound with little bleeps and bloops.
Bleeps and bloops. Yep. Yeah.
That's what they called it.
The other thing I really enjoyed about this episode was how they were giving the characters backstory. So I was able to get into Tasha Yar's like backstory, right? She started to say, I was abandoned at 5 years old and I escaped the rape gangs at 15, and like that's like a real, and you mentioned this on our last conversation about what was motivating your character, what's your backstory. And I feel like they gave a lot of that in this episode, where it was like, oh, she's been traumatized by this life experience. There are these kinds of things inside of her. We got a little bit of Geordi LaForge's insight to his, I guess, what he wants out of life, or what his desires, what his dreams would be, essentially. So I thought there was a good character kind of, because we don't know these characters. Like, this is episode 2, really.
Yeah.
And I'm just, so they have to fill us in on what's going on. And so we got a little bit of that in this episode, I felt.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make. Like, you can imagine the audience tuning in that night for that episode, and Tasha reveals that. How did that land with people? Like, wow, man, she at 5 was abandoned, and for 10 years was out there on her own, foraging, surviving, dodging rape gangs. I mean, I knew that was the case, but I had forgotten literally the timeline for that, and that is really significant, and I love that you bring up Geordi. I thought that Tasha and Geordi's scene was so poignant and so touching. A really lovely moment between them. Even though he's, infected with this thing and is a little out of it, but she comes upon him in such a kind and tender, just empathic way. It was really. I remember shooting that scene and thinking, I hope there's more of these types of scenes where the story pauses for a moment, but you see the interaction between these people and how much they care for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just how he touches her face and she lets him, and it was just very, very, very sweet moment.
Yeah, I thought LeVar's performance was really, really well done, as well as yours. But there was a vulnerability that he left in his face and his eyes when he was like, this felt like such a serious moment. It like, even you recognize it in the scene where you're like, oh, this is really serious. Like, let me take the time and listen to what he has to say right now.
Absolutely.
Because he's making a very serious point. This is not something I can just brush off and say, hey, we got to go. I need you to. This is like, stop and pause. Let's register this man's pain.
Yep.
Let's address it. Let's give him the opportunity to get it off of his mind, off of his chest, because he wants to release this information that's holding him, he's holding deep inside him. And I thought you did a great job of making that distinction of like, okay, I know I have a purpose. I know I have to get you over here to this place, but this moment is important to you. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm going to make it important to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to sit here and be the shoulder that you can, lean on and get it out. I thought that was very important because it shows a level of compassion that you guys have for each other as a crew, where it's like, oh, okay, this is why his life matters so much to her, or why it matters to each other. So it adds a heightened sense of authenticity to the relationships that you guys have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just wanted to add also with Geordie's performance, where it really got me was after that scene as well, when he was talking to Beverly Crusher. He said the line, "It's not fair, Doc. I've never seen a rainbow, a sunset, a sunrise." And the way he delivered, especially the rainbow part of that, like I went back and listened to it like 2-3 more times because I was like, wow, that's really good for a second episode. Because a lot of times it takes, a moment for actors to really figure out what exactly the writers are doing with these characters. But really good actors obviously are like, I can make this my own immediately. And clearly everybody, like we mentioned last week, everybody did their homework ahead of time. And this was evidenced when LeVar Burton did that line. And I was really impressed with it.
Yeah, me too. It was really nice to see again, after all this time. And it just like, it's such an interesting thing as an actor to, you've done it, you've shot it, you've lived it. Then you step away and you kind of think about it over the years, or something will remind you of something. And then you go back and you look at it and it's really a satisfying moment to like go, yeah, that worked. That works. It's a unique experience.
Yeah, and it's a kind of television or storytelling. Like, where else do you see these kinds of conversations happening on other shows? Like, where is this going to go on? How are these situations going to be brought up and told in another sitcom or another television show? It's not going to really happen in a law show or a cop show or, a sitcom. These kinds of conversations, these concepts have to be brought out in a science fiction show. So you can have people acting out of character. You can have these very unusual circumstances and situations that will play out. It can only be under this format. But I thought, the line that impacted me was when he said to you, help me to see.
Mm-hmm.
I see more, but more isn't better.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, I want to see through the shallow, dim, beautiful human way. And I thought, wow, that's so crazy. Shallow, dim,
you can picture it then.
Human way.
It helps us to picture how he sees versus how we see.
Yeah. And not the way, not perfection. He's not looking, for perfection. It's what makes us truly human are our flaws,
mm-hmm.
And our abilities to live with them and to continue to, stumble and trip and have to figure it out and not have everything tied up in a beautiful little package. That's what really makes us human. And that's what he's begging for that. He doesn't really, it's almost like he doesn't really feel human.
Right.
Yeah. And then you go on essentially to express your story later on with Data, and I thought that was just as impactful of a scene for me when you reveal the experiences you went through, and then you say something which I thought was ahead of its time, really ahead of its time, because this was what 87, 88, 87.
Yeah, 87.
You tell, in this case, Data, the way you want to be treated, right? I need joy and love,
Exactly.
and you're very specific about, this is how I want you to deal with me in this moment. And I thought that's a very progressive way to express yourself as a woman in those times that were really not caught up to this level of thought and expression. I thought that was delivered excellently. And it was aggressive, but it was sensual. It was assertive, and it was also just like saying, this is what I want. And it's very rare to see in situations where women express directly what they want, without having to worry about all the stigmatism of all this other stuff that's weighed on their words.
Absolutely. And Data being exacting, and he takes it, he doesn't embellish it in any way.
He's coachable.
It's factual. Yeah, it's factual. It's like she wants love, she wants joy, she wants tenderness.
Yes.
No, there's no doubting it, or questioning it, or putting it through some sort of his own filter. It's just the facts, ma'am. State the facts.
Yeah.
It's interesting, of all the beings on the ship, of all the characters on the ship, that Tasha would desire Data.
Yeah,
it's
and I don't know.
Interesting, complicated, thing about that too. I mean, we could.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Maybe
right?
he's a safer. Maybe there's some kind of safety there where she's like, I could tell this guy what I want, and he's going to do that, and theoretically nothing more, nothing different,
and not harm her.
Right.
I mean, if she has been in situations with men.
Yeah,
abusive, dangerous, violent men, then, like, men are not going to be the thing. She goes for the android. It's so interesting, as we're sitting here talking about it.
Really
because
point.
there's a feeling of safety with him, right? Because he doesn't have the baggage of the human experience.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's like, I'm programmed. I have
Now
multiple techniques
in multiple ways. Perfect.
As long
That's
as
all
he's
I need
warm.
to hear.
What if he's like cold metal, like a robot? Like he needs to at
No,
least be
he's
warm,
got a setting for
right?
that.
Okay.
Yes.
He's got a microwave setting. No, he was fully prepared. He's like, I'm ready for this. This is the moment that I've actually been.
Wait,
particularly.
now I'm ready.
He said a broad variety of pleasuring. I was like, this guy's amazing.
And then of course Tasha says, "You jewel."
I know. Yeah. Wasn't that a great line?
Loved it. Yeah.
You, of all things, you jewel. You know, the perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Just,
that was so, and I fully functional. That was another thing, you know.
Yeah.
I started laughing when I heard that. I said, "This is the best." The best moment.
Those are some of the moments and lines in this episode that still to this day are the most quotable lines in Star Trek. This is episode 2. Fully functional is an inside joke forever with Star Trek fans. Jewel is mentioned. The moment between Picard and Crusher, the drunk engineer playing with the isolinear chips. I mean, multiple techniques. All of these things, so much came out of the second episode that stood the test of time. So that's why this episode's a jewel.
And that scene has so much humor in it. You know, it has just this delight from both of them. I mean, we were laughing, you know, our tails off shooting this scene. You can only imagine. I mean, you know, first of all, the costume I've got on is taped and glued to the nth degree. I mean, one hiccup and it's over. Okay. And nobody has seen this, you know, on set yet.
Yeah.
I come to the set in this bathrobe, you know, and okay, it's time to shoot, and I have to take off the bathrobe, and I've got this, you know, thing on barely, and Brent's face is like, you know, it just, and from that moment on, I said, you cannot look at me. Do not look at me. I will never get through this scene with his, he just had this little twinkle in his eye the entire time, you know?
So after you finished shooting that scene, you actually did the real life version of what Tasha said at the end of the episode, which was, "This never happened."
I mean, what a classic. Well, I don't want to. When we get further in, I'll tell you something about that particular line. It never happened, but yes, because I'll spoil something that we haven't seen yet.
I want to still harp on this outfit. So was Bob Blackman the costume designer at the time?
No, it was the original Bill Tice.
Tice, yeah.
So Bill Tice did the original series. So he was one of the people that.
That makes sense now. It all makes sense.
Right? Of course.
Okay.
And the outfit he had me in was very reminiscent of sort of some
original
of the designs from the original series, for sure. And
there were high slits coming up the side of of those pants you were wearing.
Absolutely.
Really high slits.
Oh God. And I mean, and how low that, I mean,
the V.
Talking down
it was a double V. I thought.
You can't go any lower than that those pants, and you know, just enough of the under, you know, breast showing, and it just. And Bill was a trip, you know. He was such a lovely, lovely man, and at that time in the 80s, there was very much this thing where you would have your colors done. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about that. You were either a fall, winter, spring, or summer, and you would get, there were people that were professionals that you would come and meet them, and they would hold up different swatches of fabric in different hues and shades, and you would get your colors.
Palette.
Wow, that's really cool. And so what were you? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I think I kind of was a fall, like in those shades. But Bill took me. We left the studio and went to Pasadena one day to have my colors done. And so, you know, he could design within that palette. And
Wow.
it was just, I mean, it was such an 80s thing. I mean, I haven't heard about it in all these years. I don't know that anybody's doing this kind of thing anymore.
But you know what would be so cool about that is if you're in there modeling and looking at these colors and they're doting over you and holding up these colors next to you, you're probably sitting there going like, oh shit, I never realized this color looks so good on me, or I didn't realize, and you're finding out all these new colors that work with you.
It's fascinating. And what doesn't, you know, what you shouldn't, you know, wear, what you should avoid.
Right.
And, you know, his whole thing was that, yeah, I want, you know, when you do have other clothes on or other outfits beside your uniform, I want it to be within, you know, your range. I mean, it was a real personal kind of
it's a complexion, skin tone kind of thing.
All of that. Yeah. Hair color, eye color, complexions, tones. And it was interesting because, you know, you could begin to see it. You'd hold up something, you know, maybe like beige with me, and I would wash out.
Right.
You know, and then you hold up a blue like this outfit, and it suddenly pops.
I did a guest star on a show called Invasion one time, and the wardrobe put me in this brown shirt. And when I watched the episode, I couldn't, you know, I looked so terrible in this episode. And I remember saying to myself, I'll never agree to wear that color again on screen because it just looks so bad on me.
You're an obvious spring. Like everybody knows you're a spring. I don't know what these guys are thinking. Bunch of jerks. But look, we got to jump on our break real quick. And we'll come right back in just a second. I want to point out that we've already in the second episode hit the best moment in the history of Star Trek. Forgot it existed. I saw it just today and I was beside myself. But we'll talk about that on the other side. We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule.